Hello and welcome into episode 38 of the Stomp the Bus Show. I'm your host, Mark Harris, coming at you solo today as we got some NFL draft and more ASU basketball transfer news to go over. So should be a shorter episode today, but yeah, just going to touch on that stuff, starting with the draft, where ASU did not go over, unlike another school in this state. Um, it's funny, on the last episode 2 weeks ago, Colt and I mentioned about maybe doing a draft preview. Decided against it last week just because we were both busy. And that turned out to be the right decision because ASU had one player drafted, that being defensive tackle Jade Silvera, getting drafted by the Raiders in the 7th round. Not a great draft. There's no other way to put it. I mean, I'm sure, maybe there was a chance one of the other guys who got picked up as a UDFA maybe had a chance to get drafted in the 7th, but it's the reality of going 3-9 last year, and there are more talented guys, on the team right now that were on last year's team, but it's just what happens. You don't get a bunch of players drafted usually, unless you're Stanford. Weirdly, they had like 6 guys drafted. So, I don't know. That's just a weird one. I guess they were coached really bad because that they were worse than ASU last year. And I mean, they beat ASU, but regardless, it does keep a streak of 10 straight years of a Sun Devil getting drafted. Talk about barely keeping a streak, because if you're relying on a 7th-round pick to keep the streak alive, that's tough. But hey, still counts. I think there had to have been a few 6th and 7th guys in there towards the end of the Todd Graham era. I remember working for State Press my junior year, and this would have been the 2017 draft, working for State Press my junior year and waiting that whole Saturday for the late rounds to write a little short blurb about an ASU player getting picked. Nothing happened until the 7th round, when I think it was the Browns who selected Zane Gonzalez, kicker out of Arizona State. So it's better to have a defensive tackle being your only draft pick than a kicker being your only draft pick. But yeah, kind of shows the state of the program in both instances, because yeah, that was the 20. So that was right before ASU ended up firing Todd Graham after the 2017 season. And ASU fired Herm Edwards last year, so I guess it kind of makes sense. I think maybe in the 2016 draft, they only had Christian Sam get drafted. So there have been some lean years. There have been some lean years in there. There was some year, I'd say last year was a good year with 4 guys picked. And then you've had the years with N'Keal Harry and Brandon Ayuk going in the 1st round. Those were obviously good years. I think I don't have the whole draft history in front of me, but having 10 straight years of having someone picked, that's a good little accomplishment. It's a very ASU type accomplishment in the sense that, like, yes, they've had 10 players drafted, or 10 years in a row of players drafted, but like I just mentioned earlier, not all of those were exactly super high level picks. But I'm happy for Jade Silvera. He transferred to ASU last year from Miami. Made some plays, stuff in the run for a bad ASU defense last year, and did just enough to get drafted. So it's a good, it's a good sign, and hopefully next year's draft will be a lot more successful. Another guy who I thought might get drafted was Xavier Valade, but he almost maybe had a better day than even Jade Silvera, because according to Mike Garafolo of the NFL Network, ASU running back Xavier Valade signs with the Texans as an undrafted free agent on a deal with $175K in guaranteed money. Good for him, man, because like, no one knows what's going to happen in the NFL, and at least he'll get some level of cash guaranteed. Who knows what he does with it, but that's at least some, something to get rewarded from your college career, essentially. And that's a good spot to go to, because I don't have the Texans running back depth chart in front of me, but I can't imagine it's stellar, you know. So he could definitely have a role as like a third down back. You know, we talked about him before. He's a capable pass catching running back, decent blocker, obviously good runner. So I think there should be a spot for him. And so I really hope that he could actually stick around with the Texans. But even if he doesn't, you know, we forget about this every year in the NFL, but like by mid-season, there are so many random running backs that get picked up by teams just because of injuries and what have you. So that honestly, like Valde could be someone to watch for in fantasy football wise once we get to like late October into November, just because maybe a contender needs that third running back and they pick up Valde off the waiver wire or whatever. So I'm excited to see what he does in the NFL. Uh, Obviously, no one else got drafted, but a few guys got picked up by uh, teams as well as undrafted free agents. Cal Sowelli goes to the Cardinals, so he has a completely Arizona football career because Saguaro, ASU, now to the Cardinals. You know, he could probably stay in his same apartment and go to their facility in Tempe. So good for him. That's another guy who he's going to a bad team. And if you're going to a bad team, there, you know, theoretically should be more potential spots for you to make it. So hopefully, you know, we'll see Sowelli on special teams or something for the Cards. Tamarcus Davis goes to the Rams. I think Tamarcus Davis, I don't want to say he had a great year last year, but I think he was okay. He was pretty good. And it's not surprising to see him get picked up. We'll see what happens with him. You know, there are a lot of undrafted guys who make the NFL too. So uh, last year, Darian Butler and Curtis Hodges both went undrafted, and I think they made the initial 53 with the Raiders and Commanders respectively. So watch for that too. Travis Moore gets picked up by the Panthers as a UDFA defensive end, and then linebacker Merlin Robertson is going to attend the Washington Commanders rookie minicamp. So that's some good stuff. Uh, you know, I think next year's draft will be much better for ASU. I mean, you have two guys that you pretty much know are going to get drafted in Elijah Badger and Jalen Conyers. And maybe it's a little too certain of me to say no, but it would be very surprising, barring catastrophic injury or weird off the field stuff, for either of those two not to get picked at some point in the 7 rounds of the 2024 NFL draft. They're just too talented. I think Conyers will be a very highly rated tight end prospect, I imagine. You know, no one's going to top Brock Bowers, but he'll be up there. He's really got a lot of skills. And Dillingham's offense should utilize him very well. Badger, we see the talent. Unless it's an extremely loaded receiver class, I think that he will hear his name called. Beyond that, there definitely got some guys I'm forgetting right now. Maybe Ro Torrance is a guy, tall, lanky corner. And then when you look at the front seven, it's just so many new guys. Linebackers, a lot of new guys in there too. So no one that really stands out right away. Hopefully that doesn't matter and they still get someone. But yeah, so those are the two guys you want to watch for heading into next year's draft. So pretty quiet day for the Sun Devils in the 2023 draft, but you know, there were 3 teams in the Pac-12 that had no one drafted. One of them was Washington, and they're kind of in a little separate category because they basically had all of their key contributors returned back, and that's why in the too early top 25 polls, Washington, I saw one where they're up at 5, and I don't even scoff at that because they returned both edge rushers, quarterback, both receivers, a lot of their offensive line. Like they are really bringing everyone back. So that should be an interesting test for ASU this fall in Seattle. And then the other 2 were Colorado, which no surprise, they were terrible last year, and Arizona. That's right. I don't even know what the consecutive year is that they haven't had anyone drafted. At least the second consecutive year, because last year Jed Fish tweeted out, quote tweeted an article that said Arizona didn't have anyone drafted with not never again or something like that. And uh, fellow ASU podcasters, Speak of the Devils, they quote tweeted it with the adding the old takes exposed guys. So that's look, I get that, like, me being a little happy about ASU, I mean U of A not having anyone drafted is like a little mean spirited just because it means that like a college kid is not having his dream realized. But the fact that Jed Fish tweeted out never again and they have their best season in years and they still don't have anyone drafted. So, and like I mentioned earlier, the draft, it's an inexact science when it comes to evaluating who the actual best teams were. Because Stanford had a handful of guys drafted, Northwestern had a handful of guys drafted, and both those teams were bad last year. And U of A probably would have beaten both those teams on a neutral field, but it's just funny how it all shakes out and they don't have someone drafted after their coach promises that they would a year before. So going to take that small little victory lap today as a Sun Devil. Well, victory laps are not as common for the ASU basketball team, but they have been addressing the portal. And I'm kind of I didn't say that well at all. I'm kind of going to go through a good news, bad news type of just how I'm feeling with ASU basketball right now, because there have been some additions in, and there have been obviously lots of guys leaving through the portal. And I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around it. I'm going to start with the guys they brought in. So this week, ASU got a commit from Tulsa transfer, Bryant Selembenge. I don't know that I pronounced that right. He is originally from Montreal, just like Lou Dort. So the Montreal to Tempe connection is real. I think has French background, or at least French Canadian, but it's pronounced Brian Selebenge. But the guy's 6'8", averaged 12 points and 9.6 rebounds last year. So, not like an insanely awesome, like game-changing prospect that you get him, but a big body who can score fairly efficiently. Like, that's kind of what half the guys have been in this class when you think of Kamari Lands and Adam Miller. But look, playing at Tulsa, like, he's played against Houston, he's played against Memphis. That's not the hardest league, but this guy does, like, this is a legitimate get by Bobby. And again, they've lost so many guys through the portal. You just have to take quality players. I mean, ASU basketball roster upcoming, we don't know. Frankie Collins will likely come back just because he's entering the game for the NBA draft. Most likely he will return. Kamari Land, same type of guy. Alonzo Gaffney returning. Very similar type of player, just more of maybe a different game, but a same type of size. Jemiah Neal, the other guard. Malachi Davis. He's more of a shooting guard type. And then Zane Meeks as well. Akil Watson, those are big bodies. So I think ASU basketball, like the scoring, I don't think they'll have the same type of like high level scorers as they did last year, or maybe that's not the right way to phrase it. Like they won't have the clear scoring options, it feels like, of last year in Desmond Cambridge Jr. and DJ Horn. We're like, if you're an ASU fan, you're like, okay, like if they're taking a wide open three or even a contested three, I feel better about that than Alonzo Gaffney doing that, or Luther Muhammad from last year, or whomever. But who knows how the top dog scoring will work itself out with ASU, but they will have length. I kind of stumbled through all that to get to this point that they will have length. You have Selembenge. I can't pronounce that name. You have him, Lonzo Gaffney, Lands, Miller, Jemiah Neal's lengthy, Davis is tall, Zane Meeks, Keel Watson. So you will have guys that you can throw at other players defensively. The big question is like, who's going to shoot for one, and where's the consistent scoring going to come from? So that's still a concern, but at least Hurley is really addressing the portal, at least with volume. And that's better than nothing, with some of the guys who left, and I'm going to get into that, but it's good that he's not like, oh, we can just totally trust Kamari Lands. We can totally trust random portal guy. If you bring more guys in, players will establish themselves amongst one another, and hopefully you get a decent team out of that. However, Hurley did not just add length, because on Wednesday, he added Gilbert native Bryson Long from the transfer portal. He played at Houston Christian, not the Houston Cougars, Houston Christian, in the Southland Conference, which is a lower end D1 conference. And you know what? He shot 41% from deep, averaged just a bit under 15 points per game. So a solid player, and he addresses a need at shooting. Having a guy who transfers in who averaged, almost 42% from 3-point land, that's really big, and he'll have a very, I'd imagine he'll have a pretty defined role on this team. But the fact that he also, was scoring 15 points per game, that's impressive too. So this is one that actually, now that I think about it, might be one of the more like key transfer additions, just because of the shooting. The two guards that ASU has right now, from last year in Frankie Collins and Jemiah Neal, those guys have their strengths, but shooting last year was not one of them, or at least consistently. And, like I mentioned, 42% from deep. That's going to be very, very useful if he can maintain that. So with everything, in light of all the guys leaving from ASU, I commend Hurley for like really adjusting quickly, because not all these, there's a lot of other schools fighting for, decent level players too. So getting guys like this is a real good way to rebuild the roster and, field a competitive team. I mean, they've just have so many guys who have left, and most recent one is Warren Washington. He entered the transfer portal this past weekend, and that's tough because he was at the spring game for NIL as part of the Sun Angel NIL group doing stuff, and it just seems like it's just a tough loss, because it just seems like with all these guys, or not with all of these guys, but with at least some of these guys who have left, that NIL has to be a part of this, right? Because Warren Washington's already transferred a bunch of times. DJ Horn transferred from Illinois State to ASU, now to NC State. Duke Brennan transferred out. I'm starting to forget all the guys who transferred out, but Desmond Cambridge Jr., or not Desmond Cambridge Jr., Devin Cambridge transferred to Oregon. I have no inside sourcing. That really seems like NIL. And I don't have any problem with guys getting NIL. The reason I bring all this up is it seems like there's just not enough NIL money for men's basketball from the Sun Angel Collective. It seems, okay. I don't know anything like, but just when you see all these high-level guys transfer out of ASU after a good season, and as far as we know, it seems like the players seem to like Bobby for the most part. And so you're playing high-level basketball. You made the tournament. You seem to like your coach for the most part. And this is a broad, obviously with every guy who transfers, there's an individual story. But it just seems like it seems like some of them probably want to stay, but they're not getting enough NIL money to make it worthwhile. Devin Cambridge released a statement shortly after the season ended that said basically, "Oh, I'm coming back. I like Coach Hurley, yada yada." Week and a half later, he says, "Oh, I'm actually going to put my name in the transfer portal," and eventually he heads to Oregon. Warren Washington, he goes to he declares for the draft, and I think he still has declared for the draft. Goes to the ASU spring game as part of like a meet and greet with the Sun Angel NIL. And, fairly recently after that, he puts his name in the portal. And it doesn't look like he's coming back to ASU. DJ Horn left right away. But then Duke Brennan, he leaves out of the portal and goes to GCU. Now, Jemiah Neal put his name in the portal and came back. So maybe that is an instance of the Sun Angel Collective has a decent chunk of money for like a few basketball players, but not enough. That's what's puzzling to me because the reason why is it does seem like they do have an adequate amount of NIL money for football. And maybe they only have X amount of NIL money, and that X amount is basically what it takes to cover the football team, and they would rather lose basketball players to the portal at the, in order to keep football players from staying or keep them to stay. That I worded that poorly. Basically, it seems like the collective is okay with losing basketball players if that means the money goes to football players. And because it seems like if they had just frankly more money, then there would be fewer basketball players, high-level basketball players leaving. Like there's no way that Warren Washington leaving and Devin Cambridge leaving through the portal is good for ASU basketball because those guys were contributors last year. And again, I know they added Sean Phillips from LSU, 7 feet tall, but he has barely played. Warren Washington, like we've mentioned on the show, he's a skilled center. And so that's just a tough loss. There's no way to spin it. And that's why it's just because it doesn't feel like last year at this time or around last year at this time when the collective was kind of just getting started. Remember, we had the radio comments from Ray Anderson. I think it was February of 2022 regarding NIL. And he was like, "Oh, we're not really going to play that game." So clearly ASU, Michael Crow, most likely, didn't want to do NIL at all. And basically the world forced him kind of into doing NIL and forced ASU into doing NIL when all the guys left off the football team last year. So it seems like they've kind of corrected that with football. There will probably be a guy that leaves to get a huge NIL package somewhere at some point. But for the most part, it looks like football is fairly well set up with NIL. And remember last year, Emory Jones, he got, I think it was like $75K in a car from the collective. And so I really doubt that if Warren Washington was offered $75K from the Sun Angel Collective, I always screw that up. So from the Sun Angel Collective, I really doubt that he leaves ASU. And that I'm just using that number because it was used with Emory Jones. I don't even think they would have to offer $75K to keep him here. And so I talk all this out. I don't know. I'm just kind of exploring my thoughts on this because like I've said, it doesn't seem like it's affecting the football team that badly right now. Whereas in basketball, I tweeted about this a few weeks ago, and it's raising the question, is there not enough money for men's basketball, or is there just not enough NIL money? And I don't know. I would be one of the last people to know because I don't know what the finances are of the Sun Angel Collective, but just, by seeing just when you see all of these guys leave the basketball team, how can you not wonder how the NIL money is being distributed, you know? And when you see guys from the football team, ASU football didn't really have anyone important leave after spring football, unlike last year. And the only guys who left off the this past year after the season ended were guys, upperclassmen, guys who were from the Herm era and just wanted a fresh start. So basically, the guys I can think of at the top of my head right now, Ladarius Henderson goes to Michigan. Okay, that makes total sense. Like, sure, it would be great for him to continue being at ASU, but that makes total sense. They have a better O-line, pipeline in the NFL right now. It makes perfect sense for him to go there. Ben Scott goes to Nebraska. Again, it makes sense just because he had been a Herm guy and been through the Herm era, and then all of a sudden it flips. And so again, it's a coaching change. Like, this is what the portal was designed for, is for players to be able to leave when there's a coaching change. And, Ben Scott and Ladarius Henderson weren't recruited by Kenny Dillingham out of high school to go to ASU. And so it makes sense that they leave. But you look at the guys ASU kept, Elijah Badger. That was a guy a lot of people were scared of leaving after this past season. And I'm sure some of that's Dillingham and the offense, but it has to be some NIL as well. Jalen Conyers, Isaiah Johnson entered the portal, came back. So those are just a few guys that stand out in terms of ASU football being able to, or collective, whatever it is, ASU sports apparatus being able to maintain them and keep them in the program. And it's just totally not the case with basketball at all, save for Jemiah Neal and Frankie Collins, I guess, excuse me, because all the other guys have left. And so when you talk it out, when you just look at the absences, the comings and goings from the program, it's hard for me to believe that there's just ASU, the Sun Angel Collective is just completely broke and they're really struggling. I don't believe that. What I do believe is they have, let's just say they have $1 million stowed away. That's just a number I'm throwing out there. It's not any sort of like sourced information. Let's just say they have $1 million, but it kind of takes, $900,000 to satisfy the whole football team. And then that leaves you with $100K left. You all have to remember the baseball team and like NIL stuff for other sports as well. And maybe that just leaves, maybe basketball just gets the short end of the stick, because maybe that's how the donors are prioritizing it as well. So, and, now that I'm kind of just wrapping this up, maybe losing basketball players is the cost of doing business to keep important football players, or to attract important football players. And I've said this, I think deep down as ASU fans, what would have been more devastating from a fan perspective? Jalen Conyers and Elijah Badger going into the portal, or Warren Washington and DJ Horn? I think from an ASU fan, I think if you ask the average ASU sports fan, they would much rather keep the two important football guys than the two important basketball guys, unless they're like incredible, like a James Harden, Lou Dort type player. But the thing with, those guys stay so short anyway, even under the old rules. So this is probably, just using logic and common sense, this is probably the big donors saying, hey, this is going towards football. We need to maximize the blank out of football. And if a few basketball guys transfer out, so be it. So those are kind of my thoughts on all of that, because when you just see all these guys leaving the ASU basketball program, questions have to be asked, and red flags have to go up. And to me, unless there's some huge, abuse some weird, crazy thing that happened on the basketball program that, no one is privy to, it seems like the obvious answer is NIL, because all of these guys would have gotten playing time, all of them. And so, whereas the guys leaving recently from ASU football, most of them, it's probably because they weren't going to get a lot of playing time, so they're going to go somewhere else. Again, which makes sense. So, when you have all these handful of guys from the basketball team leave, some of whom show indications that they're going to come back, but then don't, it all roads just lead you down to it being NIL reasons. And for me, I think that, who knows how much money the collective truly has to work with and how they divvy it out. But it just seems that a way higher percentage goes to football. And because of that, the basketball team gets what they can get. And for some players, that means they're going to look elsewhere. So it seems like ASU has so much NIL money and most of it goes to football. And I think most ASU fans would probably be okay with that. All right. Well, that is it for episode 38.